My name is Amanda, 32 years old, and until 5 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. A successful career in marketing, a beautiful home in the Seattle suburbs, and James, my husband of 6 years who I believed was the love of my life. When my younger sister Cassandra lost her job and broke up with her boyfriend in the same week, offering our guest room seemed like the natural thing to do. What I never expected was how quickly my perfect life would unravel, thread by thread, until nothing remained but betrayal. Looking back, I should have noticed how eagerly James offered our home as her sanctuary. If you want to hear about the most painful betrayal of my life, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me for a story that will break your heart just as mine was broken. Before Cassie moved into our home, my life felt like everything I had ever dreamed of achieving. I had recently received a promotion at Horizon Digital Marketing, where I had been working for the past 7 years. The promotion to senior marketing executive came with a significant salary increase and more responsibilities, but I loved the challenge. My hard work was finally paying off, and I felt proud of how far I had come from the struggling college graduate I once was. James and I met during our junior year at Washington State University. He was studying architectural design while I focused on business and marketing. We literally bumped into each other at the university library, causing me to drop all my books. As we scrambled to pick them up, our hands touched, and that electric moment became the first chapter of our love story. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on a rainy Seattle evening at the exact spot where we had our first date. The wedding was small but perfect. Just close family and friends celebrating our union at a charming vineyard outside the city. Our home was our pride and joy. We had saved for 3 years to afford the down payment on the 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. The house needed work when we bought it, but James, with his architectural background, saw the potential beneath the outdated decor and worn carpets. Together, we spent weekends tearing out old cabinets, painting walls, and transforming each room into a space that reflected our personalities. The kitchen, with its marble countertops and farmhouse sink, was my favorite renovation project. We finished it just 6 months before Cassie moved in. James and I had been trying for a baby for about 8 months when Cassie arrived. We had created a timeline for our lives together, establish our careers, buy a house, renovate it, and then start our family. The nursery was already planned in my mind for the smallest bedroom, currently serving as our home office. I had even started a secret Pinterest board with baby room ideas and had been taking prenatal vitamins for months. James seemed as excited as I was about the prospect of becoming parents, often pointing out cute children when we were out and talking about teaching our future kids to play baseball or build things like he did. Cassie and I had always been close despite our 3-year age gap. Growing up, I was the responsible older sister who looked out for her, helped with homework, and occasionally covered for her when she broke curfew. She was more free-spirited than me, taking risks that I never would. Traveling through Europe after college while I immediately jumped into my career. But despite our different approaches to life, we supported each other fiercely. When our father had a health scare 2 years ago, we took turns driving him to appointments and managing his medications until he recovered. Before her life imploded, Cassie had been working as a marketing coordinator for a promising tech startup. The company had been acquired by a larger corporation, resulting in substantial layoffs, including her entire department. The same week, her boyfriend of 4 years, Ryan, announced he had accepted a job in Boston and suggested they should see other people rather than try long distance. The double blow left her emotionally devastated and financially vulnerable. When she called me sobbing about losing both her job and relationship in the span of 5 days, offering our guest room seemed like the obvious solution. The plan was simple. She would stay with us for a few months, get back on her feet, find a new job, and then move into her own place again. James agreed immediately when I suggested it, saying, "Family is family. We have to help her out." The night Cassie moved in, I prepared her favorite meal: lasagna with extra cheese and garlic bread. James opened a bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon we had been saving for a special occasion. We toasted to new beginnings and second chances. Cassie had tears in her eyes as she thanked us, promising she would be out of our hair as soon as possible. I remember hugging her and saying, "Take all the time you need. That is what sisters are for." As we sat around the dining table that first evening, laughing and reminiscing about childhood memories, I felt genuinely happy to be able to help my sister through this difficult time. I thought about how fortunate I was to have such a beautiful home to share, a supportive husband, and the financial stability to assist a family member in need. Little did I know that my generosity would be the beginning of my own downfall, and that the people I trusted most in the world were about to betray me in the most painful way possible. The first week with Cassie in our home went relatively smoothly. She spent most days in her room, emerging occasionally to make coffee or prepare simple meals. I attributed her reclusiveness to depression over her job loss and breakup, giving her space to process her emotions. By the second week, however, small but concerning behaviors began to emerge, like the first tiny cracks in a dam before it collapses completely. Despite her promises to actively search for new employment, Cassie's job hunting efforts seemed minimal at best. When I would return from work and casually ask if she had applied for any positions that day, her responses were vague and deflective. I browsed some listings or I updated my resume, but never anything concrete about actual applications submitted. Her laptop remained mostly closed, while her phone constantly buzzed with social media notifications. The dynamics in our home started shifting in subtle ways. Cassie began taking over the kitchen, preparing elaborate dinners that were ready precisely when James arrived home. These weren't just any meals, but carefully crafted dishes featuring his favorite foods, details I had mentioned in passing weeks before. James mentioned loving your grandmother's pot roast recipe, she said innocently one evening. I thought I would surprise him. James, who previously rarely made it home before 7 in the evening, suddenly began arriving by 5:30, claiming he was trying to maintain better work-life balance or had finished his projects early. He had never seemed concerned about work-life balance during the 6 years of our marriage, often staying late to impress his bosses and secure his position at the architectural firm. His behavior around me changed in almost imperceptible ways. The casual kisses when arriving home became perfunctory, if they happened at all. Our nightly ritual of sharing the day's events while getting ready for bed dwindled into brief, surface-level conversations. He started taking his phone into the bathroom when showering, something he had never done before. When I gently suggested we discuss a timeline for Cassie's stay after she had been with us for 3 weeks, tension immediately filled the room. "Are you saying you want me to leave?" Cassie asked, her eyes immediately welling with tears. Before I could explain that I simply wanted to establish expectations, James jumped in. "Amanda, she just lost everything. Have some compassion." His tone made me feel like the villain in my own home. Cassie grew increasingly comfortable, bordering on entitled, in our space. She rearranged the living room furniture without asking, claiming it improved the energy flow. She used my expensive skincare products without permission, leaving them nearly empty. She even changed the settings on our smart thermostat, keeping the house warmer than we usually preferred, resulting in a noticeable increase in our utility bill. After a month of this behavior, I finally confronted Cassie about her seeming lack of progress in finding employment. We were alone in the house, James working late for once, when I approached her as gently as possible. "Cassie, I noticed you have not been sending out many applications. I am happy to help update your resume or practice interview questions if that would be helpful." Her reaction was immediate and dramatic. "I cannot believe you are pressuring me when you know how depressed I have been," she cried, shoulders shaking with sobs. "Do you think I enjoy being unemployed and dependent on my sister? Do you think this is fun for me?" When James came home and found Cassie with puffy, red eyes, he immediately demanded to know what happened. Before I could explain, Cassie gave her version, painting me as insensitive and pushy. To my shock, James took her side completely. "Amanda, you know how hard job hunting can be in this economy. Cut her some slack. He spent the rest of the evening consoling Cassie, bringing her tea and sitting close beside her on the couch while I prepared dinner alone. That night, as I lay awake beside my sleeping husband, I felt like an outsider in my own home. A voice inside whispered that something was very wrong, but I silenced it, blaming my own stress and insecurity. My workload had increased with my promotion, and I told myself I was just projecting my own anxiety onto the situation. Cassie was my sister, after all, and James had never given me any reason to doubt his loyalty before. I convinced myself that supporting my sister through her crisis was more important than these uncomfortable feelings, and that everything would return to normal once she found a new job and moved out. If only I had listened to that inner voice, perhaps I could have prevented the devastation that was quietly building beneath the surface of my perfect life. 2 months into our new living arrangement, the subtle shifts in our household dynamics had become impossible to ignore. My workload at Horizon Digital had intensified with a major client campaign launch, requiring me to spend longer hours at the office and occasionally work weekends. The irony was painful. I was working harder than ever to maintain our beautiful home, while simultaneously feeling it slipping away from me. I began noticing how James and Cassie would abruptly stop talking when I entered a room, as though I had interrupted a private conversation. They had developed inside jokes that excluded me, referencing events or conversations that had happened while I was working. "Remember that thing with the blender?" Cassie would say, and James would burst into laughter while I stood awkwardly, not understanding the reference. The physical interactions between them increasingly crossed the boundaries of appropriate behavior between a brother-in-law and sister-in-law. James would casually rest his hand on Cassie's lower back when passing behind her in the kitchen. Cassie would playfully ruffle his hair or straighten his collar in ways that seemed too intimate. Once, I walked into the living room to find them sitting unusually close on the couch, though they immediately shifted apart when they noticed me. Bottles of wine that I had been saving for special occasions mysteriously disappeared, empty bottles appearing in the recycling bin after nights when I had worked late. Several times, I woke up around 1 or 2 in the morning to the sound of hushed laughter from the kitchen or living room, only to find them claiming they were just catching up or could not sleep when I investigated. My friends began expressing concern about the arrangement. My college roommate and still best friend, Natalie, visited for dinner one night and pulled me aside before leaving. "Amanda, is everything okay with you and James? The way he looks at Cassie seems off." I defended both of them vehemently, insisting Natalie was misinterpreting friendly familial interactions, but her words haunted me for days afterward. Barbara, my closest colleague at work, noticed my distraction and declining mood. During lunch one day, she gently suggested what I had been refusing to acknowledge. "Amanda, honey, I do not want to overstep, but is it possible something is happening between your husband and your sister?" I immediately rejected the idea, accusing her of being dramatic and inappropriate, but later cried in the office bathroom, terrified that an outsider could see what I had been trying so hard to deny. Despite my public defense of both James and Cassie, my private suspicions grew. I found myself checking James's phone when he was in the shower, scanning for text messages or calls that might confirm my fears. There were several texts from Cassie that seemed oddly timed, sent late at night or during work hours, but nothing explicitly incriminating. Just messages like, "Thanks for your help today," or "Can you pick up milk on your way home?" That could be perfectly innocent, but somehow felt wrong. When I attempted to discuss my concerns with James, his reaction only intensified my suspicions. "You are being paranoid," he said, his voice unnaturally defensive. "Cassie is your sister, for God's sake. She lost everything, and instead of supporting her, you are creating ridiculous scenarios in your head." He turned the conversation around, suggesting my stress at work was making me irrational and that I should consider therapy. The gaslighting left me questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I truly was imagining problems where none existed. My anxiety began affecting every aspect of my life. I lost weight as my appetite diminished. Sleep became elusive. And when I did manage to drift off, I had vivid nightmares about betrayal and abandonment. My work performance suffered, with my boss noting my unusual lack of focus during a performance review. The woman who had earned a promotion just months earlier was disappearing, replaced by a hollow, suspicious version of myself. In a desperate attempt to reconnect with my husband and salvage our relationship, I planned a romantic weekend getaway to Whidbey Island, where we had spent our first anniversary. I booked a charming bed and breakfast, made reservations at an upscale restaurant, and even bought new lingerie, hoping to reignite the passion that had seemingly vanished from our marriage. 2 days before our planned trip, James announced he couldn't go because of a crucial project deadline at work. When I called his office later that week to surprise him with lunch, his assistant mentioned there were no urgent deadlines that she was aware of. That night, I lay awake beside James, studying his sleeping face in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains. This man who had once been as familiar to me as my own reflection now felt like a stranger. The distance between us and our king-sized bed might as well have been miles. I reached out to touch his cheek, and he unconsciously shifted away from my hand, mumbling something unintelligible in his sleep. I thought I heard Cassie's name, but convinced myself it was my imagination, another symptom of my growing paranoia. As another week passed, the tension in our home became unbearable. Cassie had now been living with us for nearly 4 months, with no sign of looking for her own place or securing employment. The guest room had been completely transformed with her belongings, no longer a temporary space, but a permanent extension of her presence in our lives. I found myself becoming a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around their seemingly unspoken alliance, desperately trying to ignore the warning signs flashing all around me. What I didn't know then was that the vague suspicions tormenting me were about to crystallize into an undeniable, heart-shattering reality that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and myself. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early October when my carefully constructed world finally shattered completely. I had been struggling with debilitating migraine headaches, likely brought on by stress and lack of sleep. That particular day, the pain behind my right eye had become so intense that my boss insisted I go home and rest. "The campaign will survive without you for half a day, Amanda," she said, practically shoving me toward the elevator. "Take care of yourself." I arrived home just after 2 in the afternoon, a time when I knew Cassie would likely be out running errands, and James would definitely be at work. All I wanted was to take my medication, draw the blackout curtains in our bedroom, and sleep off the pounding in my skull. I entered the house quietly, dropping my keys on the entryway table and kicking off my heels. As I moved toward the staircase, I noticed something odd. James's leather briefcase was sitting by the front door. My stomach tightened as I glanced toward the driveway through the side window and saw his car parked beside Cassie's. Maybe he came home for lunch, I told myself, ignoring the voice screaming warnings in my head. The house was unusually quiet as I climbed the stairs, each step increasing the dread building inside me. When I reached the landing, I heard it. The unmistakable sounds coming from behind our bedroom door. Muffled voices, rhythmic movements. A laugh that was definitely Cassie's. Time seemed to slow down as I approached the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob for what felt like an eternity, my brain begging me to turn around, to leave, to preserve the last fragments of my reality for just a little longer. But my body moved of its own accord, turning the handle and pushing the door open. The image that greeted me is forever burned into my memory. My husband and my sister, in our bed, the bed James and I had picked out together during our 3rd anniversary trip. They were so engrossed in each other they didn't notice me at first, giving me several seconds of pure, unfiltered horror before Cassie's eyes met mine over James's shoulder. Her scream alerted James, who whipped around, his face transforming from passion to shock to shame in rapid succession. "Amanda," he gasped, scrambling to cover himself with our wedding quilt. "The one my grandmother had made for us. This isn't. We didn't." "Get out," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. When neither of them moved, frozen in their tableau of betrayal, something inside me snapped. "Get out of my bedroom," I screamed, the force of it sending fresh daggers of pain through my head. They fumbled for clothing, Cassie crying, James attempting to approach me. Amanda, please, let me explain. It just happened. We never meant for this. It just happened. I repeated, my voice deadly quiet. How many times has it just happened, James? How long has this been going on? Cassie, now wrapped in my bathrobe, attempted to speak. Amanda, I am so sorry. We never meant to hurt you. It just evolved. We tried to fight it, but… Shut up, I said, cutting her off. You don't get to speak to me. Either of you. Get out of this room now. I need to lie down. They retreated. James still trying to explain, blaming distance in our marriage, my long work hours, the stresses of trying to conceive without success. Each excuse was another dagger in my heart. I closed the door behind them, locked it, and collapsed onto the floor, unable to bring myself to touch the bed they had defiled. I spent that night in the guest room. Ironically, the only untainted bedroom in my own home. Sleep was impossible. My mind replayed the scene over and over, searching for signs I had missed, wondering how long the affair had been going on. Hours of the night ticked by as I stared at the ceiling, tears flowing until there were none left. The next morning, James was waiting in the kitchen when I finally emerged. Cassie was nowhere to be seen. He looked terrible, unshaven and hollow-eyed, but I felt no sympathy. Amanda, please, can we talk? I made a horrible mistake. It meant nothing. It meant nothing? I echoed. You destroyed our marriage for nothing. That's not what I meant, he backpedaled. It was physical. It wasn't emotional. Cassie was vulnerable. And I was feeling neglected with your work schedule, and it just happened. Where is she? I asked flatly. She's staying at a hotel. She thought it would be best to give you space. How considerate, I replied, the sarcasm bitter on my tongue. James spent the next hour begging for forgiveness, claiming he would do anything to save our marriage. That we could go to counseling, that he would cut off all contact with Cassie. I listened in silence, feeling nothing but a vast, empty coldness where my heart used to be. For the next week, I moved through my life like a ghost. I took a leave of absence from work, unable to focus or function. I barely ate or slept. The thought of divorce entered my mind, but I felt too emotionally paralyzed to take any concrete steps. James continued his campaign for forgiveness, leaving notes, sending flowers to the house, sleeping on the couch while giving me space in what had once been our bedroom, though I couldn't bring myself to sleep there either. Cassie avoided me completely for 7 days. Then came the phone call that would escalate the nightmare to heights I couldn't have imagined. My phone rang with her number, and against my better judgment, I answered. Amanda? Her voice was small, trembling. I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant. The world tilted on its axis. My sister was carrying my husband's child. The baby we had been trying to conceive for almost a year would now be born to my sister instead. I hung up without responding, ran to the bathroom, and vomited until there was nothing left inside me but emptiness and rage. The news of Cassie's pregnancy sent me spiraling further into despair. After 2 days of ignoring frantic calls and messages from both her and James, I finally made the decision to inform our parents. I needed allies. People who would understand the magnitude of this betrayal and stand by my side as I navigated the shattered remains of my life. I drove to my parents' suburban home on a Sunday afternoon, rehearsing my explanation during the 40-minute journey. How does one tell their mother and father that their younger daughter is pregnant with their older daughter's husband's child? There is no etiquette guide for such announcements, no greeting card that captures the appropriate sentiment. My parents, Rita and George, welcomed me with concerned expressions. My appearance had deteriorated noticeably, with dark circles under my eyes and clothes hanging loosely on my frame from rapid weight loss. We sat in their familiar living room, surrounded by family photos documenting happier times, including several from my wedding day, James and I beaming with hope for our future. Mom, Dad, I began, my voice already cracking. Something terrible has happened. The story poured out of me in a flood of words and tears. The signs I had missed or ignored, the devastating discovery, and finally, the pregnancy announcement. I laid my pain bare before them, expecting shock, outrage, and unwavering support. Their reaction left me stunned. After a moment of silence, my mother reached for my hand. "Amanda, sweetheart," she said carefully. "This is certainly unexpected. But family is family. These things happen, and sometimes we have to find forgiveness in our hearts." "Forgiveness?" I repeated, certain I had misheard. "Mom, they betrayed me in the worst possible way." My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, Amanda, we're not excusing their behavior. But a baby changes things. That will be your niece or nephew. Your flesh and blood." I stared at them in disbelief. "Are you actually taking their side?" "We're not taking sides," my mother insisted, though her words said otherwise. "We're just saying that perhaps, in time, you might consider working through this. For the sake of family unity." The conversation deteriorated from there, with my parents suggesting that perhaps my work schedule had contributed to James's infidelity, that maybe I had been emotionally unavailable. Each word felt like another betrayal piled atop the original. I left their house feeling more alone than ever, the one place I had expected unconditional support having failed me completely. 3 days later, my mother called to suggest a family dinner to discuss the situation maturely. Against my better judgment, I agreed, desperate for any resolution that might ease the constant ache in my chest. The dinner was set for Friday evening at my parents' home, with all parties present. I arrived to find James's car already in the driveway, parked beside Cassie's. They had come together. The symbolism was not lost on me as I sat in my own car for several minutes, gathering the strength to enter what felt increasingly like enemy territory. Inside, an awkward tableau awaited me. My parents, James, and Cassie sat around the dining table, an empty chair obviously left for me. Cassie's hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach, a gesture that sent a fresh wave of pain through me. James looked up when I entered, his expression a practiced mask of remorse that didn't reach his eyes. The first half hour of dinner passed in strained small talk, everyone avoiding the elephant in the room until my father finally cleared his throat. "I think we all know why we're here," he began. "We have a situation that affects the entire family, and we need to find a path forward." What happened next still seems surreal when I recall it. James reached for Cassie's hand atop the table, their fingers intertwining in a blatant display of unity. "Amanda," he said, his voice oddly formal. "Cassie and I never intended for this to happen. But we've developed real feelings for each other, and with the baby coming, we want to try to be a family." The casual cruelty of his words struck me like a physical blow. Cassie nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know you can never forgive me," she said, "but we want to do right by this child." Before I could respond, my mother jumped in. "Amanda, dear, this is where you need to be the bigger person. Your sister and the baby will need support." "Support?" I echoed, my voice hollow. My father leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We've been talking, and we think the most practical solution would be for you to be generous in the divorce settlement. James mentioned you're planning to sell the house. But given the circumstances, perhaps you could consider leaving it to them? They'll need the space for the baby, and you're just one person now." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table at the expectant faces of my family, all waiting for me to sacrifice the final piece of my life, my home, to accommodate the very people who had betrayed me. "You want me to give them my house?" I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "The house I saved for, that I renovated, that I made a home. You want me to walk away with nothing so they can play happy family in the space they destroyed?" "Now, Amanda," my mother began, her tone distressingly similar to the one she used when I was a petulant child. "Think of your niece or nephew. Family must stick together in difficult times." "Family?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Is that what we're calling this? Because from where I'm sitting, family doesn't sleep with your husband. Family doesn't betray your trust. Family doesn't ask you to give up everything you've worked for to make things easier for the people who destroyed your life. The dam broke. Years of being the responsible one, the good daughter, the supportive sister, the devoted wife, all washed away in a flood of rage that I couldn't contain. I screamed until my throat was raw, naming every sacrifice I had made. Every time I had put others before myself, only to be repaid with the ultimate betrayal. James attempted to interject with what he clearly thought was a reasonable suggestion. Amanda, we could split the other assets. The investments, the savings. But the house, it would provide stability for the baby. Stability? I laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. You want to talk to me about stability while you're destroying mine. I stood up so abruptly that my chair crashed to the floor behind me. I'm done, I declared, looking at each face around the table. Done with all of you. If this is what family means, I want no part of it. I left the dinner to the sound of my mother calling my name and my father's disappointed sighs. Driving home that night, I felt completely alone in the world, cast adrift by the very people who should have been my anchor in this storm. The betrayal by my husband and sister had been devastating enough. But the realization that my parents were willing to sacrifice my well-being for the sake of a twisted version of family unity was the final blow. That night, alone in what no longer felt like my home, I cried until no more tears would come. I sat on the kitchen floor until dawn, surrounded by the remnants of the life I had built so carefully, now shattered beyond recognition. As the first light of morning filtered through the windows, I made a promise to myself. This rock-bottom moment would not define me. Somehow, I would find the strength to rebuild, to fight for what was mine, and to reclaim my dignity from those who had so callously discarded it. As the saying goes, rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. The morning after the disastrous family dinner, I woke with a clarity that had been absent since discovering the affair. I was done being the victim in this narrative. It was time to take control and fight for what was rightfully mine. My first step was contacting Rebecca Winters, a divorce attorney known for her fierce representation of wronged spouses. Her reputation as a shark in a suit was well-earned and exactly what I needed. When I walked into her downtown Seattle office, she took one look at my haggard appearance and immediately cleared her schedule for the remainder of the afternoon. "Tell me everything," she said, her keen eyes missing nothing as I recounted the entire sordid tale. She took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me speak uninterrupted. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair with a determined expression. "Amanda, I want to be clear about something," she said firmly. "What happened to you is not your fault. Not your work schedule. Not your fertility struggles, nothing. The choice to betray you was made by your husband and your sister. Period." Those words, so simple yet so powerful, broke through weeks of self-doubt and recrimination. I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't experienced in months, righteous anger. Rebecca wasted no time developing a strategy. "Did you by any chance sign a prenuptial agreement?" she asked, shuffling through the preliminary paperwork I had filled out. "Yes," I replied, remembering how James had initially resisted the idea. My grandfather had just left me a substantial inheritance before we married, and my financial advisor insisted on it to protect those assets. James wasn't happy about it, but he signed. Rebecca's smile was predatory. "Let's take a look at that document." As it turned out, our prenuptial agreement contained an infidelity clause that James had apparently forgotten about or assumed would never come into play. The clause stipulated that in case of proven infidelity, the wronged spouse would retain all individual assets plus an additional 30% of shared marital assets, including primary real estate holdings. In short, the house was unequivocally mine. But Rebecca wasn't satisfied with just the prenup. "We need evidence of the affair predating your sister's move-in," she explained. "It strengthens our position immeasurably if we can prove this wasn't just a momentary lapse, but a calculated deception." Following her advice, I began a careful investigation. I accessed our shared cloud storage, combing through years of digital history. In a folder labeled Work Projects 2023, I discovered emails between James and Cassie dating back 7 months, long before her supposed crisis and subsequent move into our home. The messages started innocently enough, but quickly evolved into explicit exchanges, including plans to meet at hotels when I was traveling for work. I found credit card statements showing charges at a boutique hotel downtown on 3 separate occasions, all coinciding with business trips I had taken. There were receipts for jewelry I had never received, dinner reservations at restaurants I had never visited. The evidence painted a clear picture. Their affair hadn't just happened when Cassie moved in. It had been orchestrated, with her job loss and breakup providing the perfect cover to infiltrate our home. Armed with this evidence, I confronted James in our living room one evening, Rebecca's advice guiding my approach. I laid out the printouts methodically on the coffee table as he watched, his face draining of color with each new piece of evidence. 7 months, James, I said quietly. 7 months of lying to my face while sleeping with my sister behind my back. And then you brought her into our home and continued the affair under my roof. Amanda, I can explain, he began, but his voice faltered as he realized the extent of what I had discovered. You don't need to explain anything, I replied. The evidence speaks for itself. Now, here's what's going to happen. You and Cassie have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The house is mine, as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement you signed, specifically the infidelity clause on page 4, paragraph 3. I slid a copy of the highlighted clause across the table. You can't be serious, he protested weakly. Where are we supposed to go? Cassie is pregnant. That stopped being my problem the moment you decided to betray me, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. You have 30 days. After that, anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and disposed of accordingly. The shock on his face was almost worth the months of pain. He had never expected me to fight back, had assumed my natural tendency toward compromise would allow him to manipulate the situation to his advantage. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, James saw me not as the accommodating wife, but as a formidable opponent. My parents attempted reconciliation several times over the following weeks. My mother called daily, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful pleas to thinly veiled guilt trips. My father even showed up at my office one afternoon, causing a scene that required security intervention when I refused to speak with him. Their allegiance to Cassie and James remained unwavering. Their primary concern the welfare of the unborn child rather than the daughter whose life had been destroyed. I maintained firm boundaries, making it clear that their continued support of James and Cassie's relationship meant they could not be part of my life. You've made your choice, I told my mother during our last phone conversation. Now you have to live with the consequences, just as I'm living with the consequences of trusting the wrong people. As James and Cassie packed their belongings under my coldly watchful eye, a new support system emerged from unexpected places. Barbara from work organized a group of colleagues to help me reclaim my space, painting rooms and rearranging furniture to erase any trace of the betrayers. My neighbor Thomas, whom I had barely spoken to before, became a steadfast ally, checking in regularly and helping with house repairs that James had perpetually postponed. I joined a therapy group for people dealing with infidelity and family estrangement, finding solace in the stories of others who had survived similar betrayals. Each session strengthened my resolve and helped heal the raw wounds of abandonment. The day before the 30-day deadline expired, Cassie approached me as I returned from work. She was waiting on the porch steps, her pregnancy now visibly showing at nearly 4 months. Amanda, please, she began, tears already streaming down her face. I know what we did was unforgivable, but we're family. We share the same blood. Doesn't that count for something? I looked at my sister, really looked at her. For the first time since discovering the betrayal. In her face, I saw shadows of our shared childhood, of scraped knees and whispered secrets of the bond one had thought unbreakable. For a brief moment, grief threatened to overwhelm my resolve. You can have my husband, I said finally, my voice calm and clear. You can have his child. But you don't get my dignity, my home. Or my forgiveness. Those aren't yours to take, Cassie. Not anymore. Her tears continued, but I felt nothing. The sister I had loved was as gone as the husband I had trusted, both replaced by strangers wearing familiar faces. I stepped around her and entered my home, closing the door firmly on her sobs and, symbolically, on that chapter of my life. The next day, They were gone. James's key left on the kitchen counter, Cassie's final touches erased from every corner. Through my attorney, I learned they had rented a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, far from the spacious comfort of what had been our marital home. The contrast between their new reality and the life they had envisioned when plotting their betrayal gave me a satisfaction I wasn't proud of but couldn't deny. As I walked through the empty rooms that evening, I felt the first genuine sense of peace I had experienced in months. The house was mine, legally and emotionally. The battle had been painful, but I had emerged victorious, not just in keeping my property but in reclaiming my self-respect. I opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion, poured a single glass, and toasted my reflection in the window. To fighting back, I whispered to myself, and for the first time in months, my smile reached my eyes. 1 year after discovering my husband and sister's betrayal, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined during those dark days of shock and grief. The house that had once been a battlefield was now truly my sanctuary, redesigned and redecorated to reflect only my tastes and preferences. The master bedroom, which I had been unable to enter for weeks after the discovery, was now my favorite space, with a new bed, soothing blue walls, and absolutely nothing that reminded me of my previous life with James. Professionally, I had channeled my pain into determination, throwing myself into projects at Horizon Digital with renewed focus. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was promoted to Executive Director of Client Services, a position that came with a corner office and a salary that made my previous income seem paltry in comparison. My colleagues, who had witnessed my struggle and supported my recovery, celebrated this victory as if it were their own. The support network that emerged during my darkest hours had solidified into genuine friendships that sustained me through the rebuilding process. Barbara from work became a trusted confidant, introducing me to her circle of friends who welcomed me without question. Thomas, my neighbor, eventually became more than just a friendly face. Our casual conversations over fence repairs evolving into coffee dates and then dinner invitations. While I wasn't ready for a romantic relationship, his patience and understanding laid the groundwork for the possibility of trust in the future. Therapy became a cornerstone of my healing journey. My individual sessions complemented the group therapy, providing a safe space to process the complex emotions of betrayal, abandonment, and eventual empowerment. My therapist, Dr. Natasha Rivera, helped me recognize patterns in my relationships that had made me vulnerable to manipulation and taught me to establish healthy boundaries with everyone in my life. I developed a robust self-care routine that nourished my body and spirit. Morning runs through the neighborhood park, weekend cooking classes, and a meditation practice helped rebuild my sense of self outside the roles of wife and sister. I adopted a rescue cat named Jasper, whose independent yet affectionate nature matched my own emerging personality perfectly. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. After 3 months of complete silence, my mother reached out with a tentative apology, acknowledging that their reaction had prioritized an idealized version of family unity over my very real pain. My father took longer to come around, his traditional values making it difficult for him to fully understand the depth of the betrayal I had experienced. We were slowly rebuilding, with carefully maintained boundaries and the understanding that our relationship would never be quite the same again. As for James and Cassie, I had limited contact with them by design, though Seattle was small enough that encounters were inevitable. 6 months after they moved out, I ran into them at the grocery store. Cassie was visibly pregnant by then, her belly protruding prominently. James looked tired, the confident architect I had married replaced by a man who seemed perpetually exhausted. They were arguing over which brand of diapers to buy, their voices tight with the strain of new parenthood and financial stress. They didn't notice me watching them from the end of the aisle, and I took the opportunity to really observe their interaction. There was none of the tenderness I had once shared with James, none of the easy affection that characterized genuinely happy couples. Their relationship, built on deception and betrayal, already showed signs of strain under the weight of reality. In that moment, I felt something unexpected: pity. 2 months later, through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Cassie had given birth to a baby girl they named Lily. Despite everything, I sent a small gift to the hospital, a stuffed elephant with no card attached. Not for them, but for the innocent child who had entered the world through no fault of her own. It was the last act of connection I allowed myself with their new life. The lessons I learned through this painful journey were profound and lasting. I discovered that forgiveness isn't about excusing the inexcusable or welcoming toxic people back into your life. It's about releasing the burden of anger so it doesn't consume you from within. I forgave James and Cassie not for their benefit, but for my own peace of mind. I learned that sometimes the most loving families can inflict the deepest wounds, and that blood ties don't automatically entitle people to unlimited chances or unconditional support. True family, I discovered, can be built from friendship, mutual respect, and shared values rather than mere genetic connection. Most importantly, I learned my own resilience. The woman who emerged from the ashes of betrayal was stronger, wiser, and more authentically herself than the people-pleaser who had ignored red flags in the pursuit of maintaining harmony. I no longer feared being alone, having discovered that solitude was vastly preferable to toxic companionship. As I sit here in my home office, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, I feel an unexpected sense of gratitude for the journey that brought me here. Not gratitude for the betrayal itself, which will always remain an unforgivable breach of trust, but for the strength it forced me to discover within myself. The life I am building now is entirely my own creation, unfettered by others' expectations or demands. The future stretches before me, filled with possibilities I never would have explored had my life continued on its previous trajectory. There may be another love story in my future, or perhaps my greatest romance will be with my own independence. Either way, I face the unknown with confidence rather than fear, secure in the knowledge that I can weather whatever storms may come. If you're going through a similar betrayal or heartbreak, remember that rock bottom is not your final destination, but the foundation upon which you can build a new life. What feels like an ending may actually be the beginning of your most authentic chapter. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button. Subscribe to hear more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible even after the most devastating betrayals. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful rebuilding happens after the most complete destruction.